Hi, and welcome back to the Quickening stream. I'm your host, Ryan, from Zadok Light YouTube channel, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Sam from Mark13Records.com. Hi, Sam.
Hello.
And Bruce from JustThoughtsstudies YouTube channel.
Hi, Ryan. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you, buddy?
Great.
Good. Well, as previously stated, in our first 4 episodes, we will be covering the 4 hidden dynasties of the end times, which are education, economics, politics, and religion. In this episode of the Quickening Stream Radio Hour, we are discussing the hidden dynasty of politics. So let's start this off with a question for you, Bruce. What is the hidden dynasty of politics?
Well, the hidden dynasty of politics is the political wing of this 4-staged agenda known as the 4 stages of the locust. If we define politics by its definition in the dictionary, the dictionary says, the art or science of government or governing, especially the governing of a political entity such as a nation, and the administration and control of its internal and external affairs. 2, political science. 3, the activities and affairs engaged in by a government, politician, or political party. And 4, the methods or tactics involved in managing a state or government. In other words, what we've got here is a system controlled by politics, and of course politics, the government, and in the United States, a 2-party system where we've got 2 parties pitted against each other seemingly, but really it seems to be that they're more on the same side than anything else except on a few issues. But what we've got in this political system is the government, which sets your taxes, makes your laws, takes money from you or distributes it, or you could say redistributes it to whomsoever they will, and they use their political might to bring about change. And in the 4 stages of the locust, that change is not for good. It's for their own agenda. In other words, to bring about the global government system. So in this political system, you've got the power of taxation. In other words, they can decide how much taxes you pay. They can dispense the money they take in with taxes and send them or give them to whoever they will. In other words, they're supposed to take care of our veterans. They're supposed to take care of the aged, the elderly, the infirmed. But more often than not, they use their power to give out entitlements to people who really aren't entitled to the things which they're given. In other words, as I mentioned in last week's show, you've got the government saying that things like abortion ought to be funded by the government, sex changes ought to be funded by government, and many other things. You have government on many levels. It's not just the government of the United States or of any country for that matter. It's state and local governments and commissions, such as your local school commissions, which steps back into the educational system. And what you've got here is the power and might of this system to pretty much do what it wills. In other words, the United States is a republic. However, in this republic, we do practice democracy. In other words, the government was formed for the people, by the people, which gives us the right to vote for certain candidates. But most often, the candidates that were offered are groomed and selected, and more often than not, the ones that we are given as choices are selected by the higher echelon of those who are really in power rather than by the people. So when they get into power, they can put whatever standards, laws, or policies they want on the books, including our president by executive order, and can pretty much drive us whatever they want, like a cowboy might drive cattle. So within this system, you see so many facets of power which can be abused and is being abused. And again, not necessarily for the good. For instance, in government nowadays, there are lawyers which claim that the government cannot endorse any God, yet even though they say that, or religion, yet even though they say that, they allow atheism in our schools. And I just did a study recently where a school commission, a school board in Orange County, Florida, has now allowed satanic coloring books to be handed out to children. And, you know, years ago, this would have been unthinkable. But now it seems to be the norm. And these politicians will use their power and this gift giving, this bribe giving, as it were, entitlement mentality, to further their causes, usually to bring about socialism, like we see going on right now. In other words, we've got universal health care now. Even though the majority of the people were against it, we haven't. You know, that was not put to a vote. Rather, it was decided by the pen of one man and by his cronies in the government, in other words, in the House of Congress and in the Senate. And even though there was an opposition to it, which, you know, at times they have used a 2/3 majority vote to pass something. Well, now they've changed it to if it's 51%, then 49% have to suffer because of it. So you can see how this political system spreads its tentacles or its snare to bring about change and to basically force people to go the way it wills. And the way it's willing us to go is towards global community, global government. In other words, the New World Order, the one world system.
Yeah, and that really is the goal of all four hidden dynasties, isn't it?
Exactly. They all work together. I mean, we've already covered education and the economy, and the economy is tied in with politics as well as education. And next week, when we talk about religion, we're going to see how it's intertwined with this. In other words, the government is using religion right now. They'll say that we cannot endorse any God, and they've even done away with prayer in schools and prayers at football games and many other things where they've placed laws to say that you cannot do these things. And, you know, the United States is a free country, or at least it used to be. On our money, it says, "In God we trust." In our Pledge of Allegiance, it says, "We are one nation under God." But they don't respect that. Rather, they fall back on their interpretation of the separation of church and state to say, we don't endorse any religion. Which means, if they don't endorse any religion, they're endorsing atheism. Well, I hate to say this, but atheism is a religion as much as any other. It's not that atheists attend a building, a temple, to gather to worship any deity, because most certainly they do not. But they are militant in most cases, and they do lobby, and they do sue before the ACLU and before the Supreme Court, and they push things on people like we've been talking about. In other words, if you went back to the 1940s, abortion was unthinkable. And saying that you couldn't pray in school was unthinkable. Prayer was a part of school every day in those days. And the teaching of evolution now has replaced the teaching of creation. And, you know, that of itself would not be such a horrible thing if both were allowed to be taught side by side, but they're not. One is censored, in other words, God and creation, and the other is not censored. And even in our colleges, the Quran is allowed to be taught, and the Bible is allowed to be even taught as long as it's taught as mythical literature. But it's not allowed to be looked at as anything factual or historical, even though it is. So, there you go.
Yeah. And, we could talk a lot about how the hidden dynasty of politics has infiltrated the American political system. But this is not relegated only to the United States. You would think that it would be all over the world. Now, Sam, what can you tell me about how the politics of, or the hidden dynasty of politics has manifested itself around the globe?
Well, you had the League of Nations, and I have the good old New World Dictionary in front of me here. Let's see what it says for League of Nations. An association of nations, 1920 through 1946, established to promote international cooperation and peace. Peace, peace, peace. It was succeeded by the United Nations, and that was in 1945. And you had to have that before the generation of the fig tree began with the formation of the State of Israel. And the United Nations was FDR's idea, by the way, so there's your hidden dynasty of politics. The land was donated by John D. Rockefeller Jr. in New York City. And if I can, let me just read from Revelation chapter 13 real quickly to answer that question. And verse 1, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and sea is symbolic of peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues in Revelation, etc. And saw a beast rise up out of the sea. A beast rise up out of the peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues of the earth, having 7 heads, 7 dominions, and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, symbolic of 10 kings, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And if you're familiar with the book of Revelation, you know that Christ speaks of the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews but do lie and are the synagogue of Satan. So it's the Kenites behind this one world system. And this goes on during the 5th trumpet, the first 4 trumpets, which line up with the 4 hidden dynasties. They work together very incestuously to formulate this one world system. And then it goes on to describe it, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. Remember that leopard from Daniel 7 from the first episode with the 4 wings. There's the 4 hidden dynasties, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, communistic, atheistic foundation, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and again, false Judah. The lion is the symbol of Judah. So you have royalty there. And the dragon, that's Satan, gave him his power and his seat, thronos in the Greek, and great authority. And what happens to this one world system? Where is this all headed? And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death. And if one of its heads is wounded, the whole thing's wounded. Because you can't have a one world system unless you have all the pieces of the puzzle. Everyone has to be cooperating in it, or it's not a one world system. And his deadly wound was healed. And how so? Satan will appear as the false Christ in Jerusalem, and the whole world will whore after him, and then you'll have that one world system completely with no opposition other than from God's election, and all the world wondered after the beast. So there you have it. That pretty much nails it. It's a global community, quote unquote, and they all work together. And anyone who doesn't play along, like Assad, for example, they go and replace them. And you saw what happened to Gaddafi. He wasn't a team player. And Saddam Hussein, so on and so forth. Any threat to the peace, any threat to the New World Order, they're going to take down. And so now you have this BRICS bank coming up here that's very deadly woundish, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. you see, these two world systems might form into one for all we know, and then it receives a deadly wound. So we'll just have to watch.
And it's also written of this one world system that who is likened to the beast, and we know, of course, this is not a beast like Godzilla. It's Greek symbolism for a political system. And it says, who is like unto the beast and who was able to make war with him? Well, if everyone is in a one world government, then no one can war upon another because they're all under one flag, one ensign, and in this case, under one being which they perceive to be Christ returned, when it's really Satan the Antichrist.
Yeah, so this is definitely something we need to watch, ladies and gentlemen. Now, with regards to America and this hidden dynasty of politics, there's got to be a lot of people that are involved in it. A lot of people that you may see on television every day. Now, we had previously made a decision not to name very many names in this episode of politics, so as not to alienate different people that may hold different political views. We want to come to you looking at this from a biblical point of view. And there is one name I really do want to name, and I don't think it's going to throw anyone off. But when I think of politics and the hidden dynasty of politics in America, and with presidents in mind, the first comes to mind for me is Woodrow Wilson. And of course, that's because he was a key person in the bringing forth of the Federal Reserve System, which that's going to take you right back to the hidden dynasty of economics, which we covered last week. But it is that sort of infiltration from these Kenites, from these world bankers, from these power brokers, so to speak, that pollutes our political system and makes it not only non-representative of the people, but it makes them tools to further line the pockets of these international bankers, actually. So there's thousands and thousands of examples in American politics alone. But what is it, in your opinion, Sam, that you could point to here in America that is a glaring example of this hidden dynasty of politics at work?
Well, since you brought up Wilson, I have here that Gary North book, Government by Emergency, and here's something on Wilson that's interesting that kind of spells it out. It's from Chapter 7, Blueprint for Tyranny, and it reads, and this is under the heading Executive Order 11921. This catalog of horrors was issued as Part 4 of the Federal Register. It reinforces previous executive decrees of this kind, but this pronouncement went farther than earlier versions. It deals with emergency preparedness functions. Its message is clear enough to anyone who reads it. If the president declares an emergency, you had better be prepared. And then it goes on to say, executive orders began with Woodrow Wilson in 1916, the U.S. Shipping Board Act. The 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act is still in force. In fact, it was under the provisions of this wartime act that FDR closed the banks in peacetime in March of 1933, a suggestion which Herbert Hoover had given to him, or so Hoover bragged in his autobiographical memoirs. Congress was then told to validate this action, which it did. That temporary emergency was not repealed until President Ford belatedly, oh, by the way, President Ford's vice president was Nelson Rockefeller, incidentally. Yeah. Just thought I'd throw that in there. Signed a law canceling it on September 14th, 1976. This 1776 law also canceled Truman's 1950 Declaration of Emergency, Nixon's Declaration of Emergency in 1970, the post office strike, and the one in 1971, exchange rates. They have a life of their own even after the conditions producing them are long gone. And I don't know if that really answers the question, but I had looked up using the index of this Wilson. And he, in his defense, he did say, and I had the quote up, I think, for the video, the last episode, he repented, apparently.
Yeah, you want me to tell you exactly what he said?
Yeah, I'm a most unhappy man, that quote, yeah.
Yeah. This was after he had signed the Federal Reserve Act. I believe it was in, 1913?
I believe he said it after he was already, he was no longer president, wasn't he? He was retired and getting older.
That quote was, but I'm talking about this was after he had done this under pressure, under duress for political gain. But he said, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. You remember in the Bible it says, he shall become great with a small people. In other words, we're talking about a few men, a few of the richest men, the higher echelon. And we have mentioned some of their names: Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Goldman Sachs, and so on. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. And this is written Woodrow Wilson after signing the Federal Reserve Act into existence.
Yeah. You know how many years it took for them to get that Federal Reserve System? We had a first Bank of the United States. We had a second Bank of the United States. And then we finally got the Federal Reserve System nearly 150 years since our country had been formed. So the Kenites work slowly. These one world elite, these one new world order elites, they work very slowly. And I think it was you, Bruce, who said they work generationally.
Yes, they do. They work generation to generation, each generation with the expectation that they will bring about world government in their time. But if not, then laying the groundwork whereby the next generation can pick up where they left off. And that's why you have seen these families of these bloodlines, such as the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Goldmans, and a number of others. There's a whole plethora of them. The Carnegies and they call them the 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati. But if you ask me, the Illuminati is just a front name for what they really are. Really, they're just that same old breed of Kenites.
Yeah, that old synagogue of Satan.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is, yeah, they do work slowly. They take ground inch by inch, and an inch becomes a foot becomes a yard becomes 100 yards, and next thing you know, it becomes a mile. And, it's like I've made the point in some of my Bible studies and some of my commentaries. If they had done these things all at once, say in the 30s or 40s, they never would have been accepted by the people because people were much more awake and attuned to their freedoms then. But they did it over a long period of time. They placed people in key positions at colleges and universities to be teachers. They placed people on the Supreme Court. So they have used false weights and balances to stack the deck in their favor so that whatever they decide is the way it's going to go. Just like I said earlier about the separation of church and state. The modern definition of the separation of church and state has absolutely nothing to do with what the founding fathers founded this nation upon. It's got nothing to do with that at all, but they will use it for that as a tool to say we can't endorse religion. But this nation was formed under religion. The words of the Bible are found, that is to say, the commandments in the Bible are found within our Constitution, within the preamble of the Constitution, within the words of people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And, you know, there are people that say, well, Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin and so many others were atheists. They were not. They were not atheists. Their own historical writings, as covered by people who quoted them and wrote their quotes down in books, showed that these were men of faith who had consciences. And, you know, there was even a great debate over slavery whenever they were writing the Constitution of the United States. But in order to get the 13 colonies together, they gave in on that argument to keep the Union united, or to form the Union, in other words.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, you know, I think a good way to illustrate this hidden dynasty of politics at work in America is simply to look at how far, really look at where our country came from. If you look at the United States prior to the Civil War, the United States appeared much differently than it does to this day in the way in which it works together. See, used to, the United States of America was a union of states. Now, what is a state? A state is, it could be a country. In our case, it's merely a piece of government. It is a region that's cut out of our union. But if you look back, each state in the union operated as a separate entity. And all of these states together would send their representatives to the nation's capital in order for all states to be represented amongst their brethren. And the governors all together had more power than the President of the United States could ever dream of. The President of the United States was really just a lowly administrator that helped the states not only communicate but work together both legislatively and governmentally. So they were really just an administrator that kept things in order, and it was the governors of each state that had the true power. It was the senators and the congressmen that represented each other when the states needed to get together and decide how they were going to do things as a whole. And you can look at that at, say, take for instance the War of 1812. Well, did the United States of America send troops to New Orleans during the Battle of New Orleans? Well, absolutely not. The United States sent no troops because the United States did not have a federalized military. We had states that sent troops.
Yeah, state militias.
Exactly. The Tennessee militia marched from Tennessee all the way down to southern Louisiana to fight the British along the Mississippi River. So that's how it always was. You fast forward to the Civil War, all of a sudden the Union had an army, and it was a quasi-federal army in that all the states sent their troops, but they all were Union troops. And then you go further, and you look at World War I. There was even still a semblance of a state militia-style military that protected our country in World War I. But you fast forward to World War II, all of a sudden, that really, you don't see that too much anymore. World War II, you see a federal military being brought into creation. And now, if you join the military, you are in a federal force, unless you elect to join the Army or the Air National Guard. That is really all there is left of that old and better system. We have a federal government that is vastly more powerful than a state. If a state decides to go its own way and determine its own fate and to teach its children good principles and not abide by these federal regulations, all of a sudden these states, these school districts, no longer get funding. And they are pretty much blackmailed into bowing to the will of the federal government, not bowing to the will of all of the other states, not coming together and discussing it, but bowing to the will of this all-powerful federal government that can basically force any state to bow to its will, lest they make them destitute. So I think that's a one of the best ways you could look at it and realize how this generationally or generational change through this hidden dynasty of politics has vastly and fundamentally changed the nature of politics in our country.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and just what you were talking about in the Civil War, if you look at the names of the brigades and the battalions, you would have the Michigan 101st or whatever, and the New York 49th, and the Tennessee 12th, depending on which side of the war you were in. But now it's not like that. Now you are in the 101st Airborne, or they're not done by state anymore. Now they just have names like I just used, the 101st Airborne, the 49th Military Squadron, whatever. I'm just giving some examples. I'm not really using actual names, but just to let you know. But what we see going on in this country right now, and I've already alluded to this, but I'm going to allude to it again, is you've got an open border on the south side of this country, which is allowing people to pour across it. And the government of the United States has declared that anyone in this country who has not legally become a citizen is not a citizen, and therefore is not entitled to things like welfare, WIC, SNAP, HUD homes, Social Security. But such is not the case. People are pouring across the border and signing up for this, or getting across the border and having a child, so the child is born American. And in doing this, what they're doing is importing votes. They're importing millions of votes so that eventually, all these people coming in, naturally the brown-nosing Democratic progressive left wing is going to pander to them and actually cause their destruction by keeping them in a place and state of poverty perpetually, and they will keep pandering to them and saying, we are for you, we'll give you more welfare, we'll give you more food stamps, we'll give you more WIC, which I've always said is with illegitimate children, but we'll give you more SNAP, we'll give you free gas cards, we'll give you free cell phones, we'll give you low-income housing, or we'll give you free housing. They buy votes in this manner, and they stack the deck in doing this and redrawing political districts so that conservatives will not be elected anymore. And when they finally root it out to where there are no conservatives elected and everyone's either a moderate or a moderate left-winger or a full-blood left-winger, in other words, a full progressive socialist, then that will be the downfall of this nation. And it's all controlled by the government. It's all controlled by the powers that be, and the government is controlled by the higher echelon. In other words, our president has shown how inept he is, and he has shown how that he doesn't know how to fight a war. He doesn't know how to protect Americans. Benghazi should have outraged people just about as bad as 9/11 did, because it did happen on 9/11, yet nothing's been done about it. We're seeing American journalists being beheaded overseas. Nothing's being done about it. Our president is too busy playing golf or doing whatever he wants, or focusing on a white police officer in Ferguson who shot an African American man in self-defense. And, they're more concerned with politics like that than they are with protecting the country. And we know that Al-Qaeda and ISIS have promised that they're going to strike America. We know that they know we have an open border policy. We know that they're going to sneak in that way because they can pass for looking like Mexicans long enough to get into the country. They can probably even learn the Spanish language well enough to get into the country. These people are cunning. And once they get here, they set up their little terrorist cells. And, you've even got Americans now, homegrown terrorists, going to join ISIS or in support of ISIS in this country. And it reminds me of the 1940s and 1930s, excuse me, where America had the American Nazi Socialist Party. A lot of people are not even aware of that, but, any historian worth his salt knows that before we went to war with Hitler, there were people in this country wearing the brown shirts, the red swastika armbands, and carrying the Nazi swastika flag and the American flag side by side, much like the Ku Klux Klan and the neo-Nazis do these days. They still use that flag that Americans went and shed blood to fight against and wave it proudly. And, I think largely that is a big put on too, just like many of the false flags that we see. I mean, you want a good example of the false flag, of a false flag? We had the bombing in Boston at the Boston Marathon. Now, whether it was the actual people that they say did it or not, in other words, whether they were Chechnyan terrorists or not, that was the first time on American soil that police officers went into people's houses, 12 at a time, with a hand on each other's shoulders, carrying an AR-15 assault rifle or an M6, M16, and went in without a warrant and searched people's houses. Now, that has not happened since before the Revolutionary War, when the British used to do that. And you see these kinds of things going on, and it's just getting us prepared. Now, do I think that anything is really going to happen bad like that? Probably not, because when the Antichrist comes, he's going to come in peacefully and prosperously. But the world government that precedes him, which is going to be largely secular and will probably cause the deadly wound, will probably come into being in just such methods as I'm talking about. And probably in ways that none of us perceive, because there are so many conspiracies out there, and so many people believe this or that or the other, till everything becomes a conspiracy and everything becomes confusion. So you can even see how Mystery Babylon, the mother of harlots, in other words, Babylon meaning confusion, ties into this. Because once everything becomes a conspiracy, then nobody knows what the truth is anymore. And everybody suspects everybody of everything. And, that's the way it was in Russia. That's the way it was I shouldn't say Russia, I should say the Soviet Union. In other words, people had their phones tapped, NSA. People were monitored. People had to have papers to go from point A to point B, and they had to stop at checkpoints. And, we're seeing the beginnings of that. They call them DUI checkpoints and stuff like that, and they say it's for the safety. But, see, that's what they always cloak themselves in. And they're preparing people for these things, just like when Katrina hit, or like other things, and the National Guard went to protect the people got used to seeing armed militiamen walking around with these high-powered rifles. And, this is something that they're doing slowly. They're getting people acclimated to the idea so that when it finally comes down, nobody's going to be all that surprised by it. And then, of course, you've got all the conspiracies about FEMA and the caskets and these underground bunkers and these FEMA camps all over the world. You know, and maybe these things do exist. Maybe they are real, but are they ever going to be used? Probably not. Probably they're put there as a scare tactic and another way to spend taxpayers' dollars to take down the United States, to put us into even more debt. So, I mean, any way you cut it, this works to their advantage, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, Sam, I want to kind of go to you. You know, we have a very sick and twisted mindset. Well, we don't, but politics in our country and many politicians have a very sick and twisted mindset. One that is really, if not already evil, definitely leaning towards it and leaning towards things that will be both destructive to our country and destructive to our overall way of life. Now, what I want to ask you is that with all of these things going on, with the hidden dynasty of politics wreaking its havoc on our country, and we know that this is written in prophecy and that it is the negative part of God's plan, what can we do as Christians to combat the effect that it will have on our children, ourselves, and our country? Without getting in the way of God's plan, what can we do to perhaps negate its negative impact on us?
Well, you want to study to show yourself approved. That's how you get the seal of God in your forehead, which inoculates you from receiving the mark of the beast, which is deception. And that doesn't happen until Satan appears as the false Christ, which is the real threat. The Kenites in their world government isn't really the threat, not as much as the Antichrist. And you study your Father's Word chapter by chapter and verse by verse every day. Stay in His Word and educate yourself, because knowledge is power. And when that time comes, when Satan appears as the fake Jesus in Jerusalem, we are to stand, as it's written in Ephesians chapter 6, with the gospel armor on and in place, with that seal of God in our forehead, knowing what's going down, and then we're delivered up, at which time the Holy Spirit speaks through us. So, are you to fight or against or try and stop the one world government? That's not going to work, because it's written, it's going to happen. It's the negative part of God's plan, as you said, and that's the all you can do. You know, Mark 13, you will be delivered up, but take no thought beforehand what you shall say, because it's not you that speaks, it's the Holy Spirit. And I'm paraphrasing, but Christ told us all things, everything we need to know. So therefore, the answer is within the Word of God. And God takes care of His own. It's nothing to be afraid of. Satan's not going to be killing people. I see a lot of Christians run around, they're going to chop your heads off. You know, either they think that or they're going to fly away. Neither one is true. To be delivered up to death simply means to be delivered up to Antichrist. One of Satan's names is death. Because
Hebrews
when
chapter
people
verse
worship,
14.
yes, whenever they worship Him, they die spiritually. So there's the real threat there. You're talking about the soul there now. And the global government is inevitable. And like Christ said in the last verse of Mark chapter 13, what I say unto you, I say unto all. So there's no getting out of it. Unto all, watch. So we are to watch. And it's looking like it's not going to be too awful much longer, the way things are looking. This is unprecedented.
Well, not only that, if you go back to the big four prophets, Isaiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and Jeremiah, it's written several places that you're going into captivity, and you shall go into captivity. And you shall grow your vineyards and raise your kids, and you shall prosper, but you're going into captivity. So we're not to fight against the captivity. Now, the question that you posed, Ryan, what can we do? The best we can do is try to vote our conscience. Obviously, I don't think they're going to allow anyone who would make any real change into power, whether it be president, senator, or congressman. I think they're all groomed. I think they're all put on puppet strings before they get up to a certain level. And that's why we see such an impotent government right now. You know, you've got these Republicans standing up there saying, we should do this, and we should do that, and we should not allow this, and we should not allow that. But what do they accomplish? What did they accomplish when they had a majority in the House and in the Senate? Nothing. And what will they accomplish if they get elected this time? Nothing. They're still going to be headed towards global government because they're still going to be controlled. And they're not going to overturn this Obamacare thing. I mean, they may claim they will, and they may take steps to try to limit it, but what's done is done as far as that. And that, too, is just something to draw people away from the real truth of what is going on, like the conspiracy theories. And, you know, you've got other teachers, and I'm not going to mention any names or anything like that, but you got people teaching on YouTube that the government is run by lizard people. That, yeah, really, you know.
Or the Greys, the
Yeah.
Gray aliens.
Yeah, you got people that believe in the Anunnaki, and you know, if the Anunnaki are anything, they're the Anakims or the fallen angels. You know, there's no such thing as lizard people. People take literal things from the Bible. I mean, it's a real sad testament to Christianity that some people can recognize that Satan has children upon this earth and that they're called serpents and vipers by him in John chapter 8 and Matthew chapter 23. But they think they're literally serpents or vipers or lizard people. You've even got people posting videos where they have altered them with Photoshop or with this or that or the other, you know, trying to show George Bush or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton with snake eyes and stuff like that. And, you know, any ignorant fool can tell that stuff's unreal. It's a big joke. All these is disinformation campaigns. They're misinformation. That's what the Kenites do. You know, that's what they've always done. You know, whenever Christ went into the temple and healed on the Sabbath day, you know, had I been there and had I been a priest, I would have said, my God, a miracle has been done. And on the Sabbath day. But what did the Kenites do? You healed on the Sabbath day. You did work on the Sabbath day. Let's stone him. You know, and that's the letter of the law for you. They were the ruling power. Just like Jesus said, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses. Well, what is the seat of Moses? Well, that was the seat of the law. And that was the seat of teaching. And there you go. That's your educational system and your government system right there. And your government system is the political system, your educational system, and the economy ties in with the government because they control the money flow. And as we shall see coming up in the next lecture, we'll see how the religious system ties into this. Because, you know, what really kills me is you have in America now groups of people who identify themselves as Christian socialists. And that's an oxymoron to even say that. There's no such thing as a Christian socialist. Hitler was a socialist. Stalin was a socialist. Lenin was a socialist. Sure, they led farther and went to communism, but that's how they got in, was by promising socialism. In other words, all community, you know, one big happy family. And that's the whole thing behind social media, like we've talked about. You know, the entire world is now connected by the internet. And what is government keeping us from doing? We talked about this too. They're not allowing us to drill for our own oil. They're putting a stop to us getting our own coal. They won't allow us to go in and frack to get natural gas. And, America is just full of these natural resources, and we're not allowed to use them. Why? Because if we did use them, we would not be part of the global community who's got to keep money flowing to Saudi Arabia or to Brazil or to wherever to feed other governments. So the money is leaving this country and going to other ones, just like American companies going overseas, and just like China selling us their crap. And most of the stuff that we buy here is CCS, and that's cheap Chinese shite. You might want to drop the E, but that's what it is. It's cheaply made stuff that they pay workers pennies on the dollar to make, and they bring it over here and charge us big bucks for it, and it lasts no time because it's junk. And there are ships heading here every day from China, giant, huge ships, carrying cargo, trailer loads, thousands of trailer loads of their crap. Nothing's made in America anymore, or very few things, because things can't be allowed to succeed here because of what the government does through taxation, through fine and levy, through penalty, because of what it does to the ecological system and to the environment. You've got oil in this country that's on protected wetlands. Years ago, the government went in and they found out where all the oil was. And they went up and bought these lands and made them protected federal reserves. In other words, nobody can go in there and drill on them, even though they're rich with oil, ripe with oil. Enough oil to supply this nation for the eternity. But we're not allowed to touch it. And the whole method to that madness is to keep us where we are dependent on foreign oil. We're dependent on oil from Saudi Arabia, from our enemies like Iran, from Iraq, from Qatar, from Yemen, from all these places that hate us, that where ISIS is taking foothold, where Al-Qaeda was born, regardless of who created it. I mean, we know at the base who created it, obviously, the sons of Cain, but we got all this going on, and all of this is part of the governmental system, that is to say, the political system of the four hidden dynasties. So that's it in a nutshell. They control every aspect of your life. We're already in bondage. We're already slaves right now. You have to go out and work every day in order to make ends meet. And they drive up taxes, and you have to pay it. And everything costs more, and you have to pay it. And your dollar is worth less and less, and the profits that they make and put in their pockets is more and more. And, all these feel-good politics that they're trying to pull on us are not accomplishing anything but the destruction of Western civilization as we know it. I made the comparison in one of the previous lectures of what the minimum wage used to be and its growth and the cost of gas and the cost of meat and food and stuff. Well, every year that gets worse. And every now and again they'll ease it. And every now and again they'll do what they call quantitative easing. And, they'll manipulate the stock market and make it look like it's shooting way up. And, it's funny, it's happening now, coming up in an election year, that the stock market is up as high as it was, because they'll claim Obama's policies are finally working. They're finally kicking in, when they're not. All they're doing is manipulating the situation through speculation, and they're dropping the price of gas on purpose, and they're making things a little bit better so that people say, we did the right thing in voting for that president and voting the Democrats in. So we need to do it again. We've got to vote them in because things got better. But if you look at the last 8 years of what's gone on in this country, and even under Bush and Clinton and Bush before him, and so on and so forth. Each year it's gotten worse. Each year it's grown. Each year the dollar is worth less and less. And, now they're talking about having their own standards of money. China, we've been talking about BRICS, but even before that, China was talking about going on the gold standard or the silver standard and dropping the US dollar. Do you know what would happen if that was to occur? That would crush us. And you know that the Kenites have to be involved with that, even though they are the Federal Reserve of the United States, because like I say, they always play both sides. But they're not worried about the money like people think. Even though they line their pockets with it and they live well, they've got more than half the world's wealth. So no matter what happens, they're still going to have money. But even so, their whole plan is to take us into world government by whatever means necessary, and to keep us dependent on foreign countries, and to keep us, one of the reasons for the creation of the internet, like we mentioned before, was so that they can watch what people say, watch what people do. But another reason is to allow us to communicate with other countries and talk to people in other countries, so that we all become one big happy family of global government, and we can all sit around and sing songs about peace and happiness and brotherhood of man. And that's what it amounts to. That's your political system, your political wing of this Four Hidden Dynasties agenda in a nutshell.
Thanks, Bruce. That was a very good. Those are very good examples and a very good explanation of what's going on. And while you were speaking, I had a couple of thoughts, and I wanted to share this both with you guys as well as our listeners. If you go to the book of John, chapter 19, beginning in verse 10, I think this is something that we need to go back to when we're looking at this hidden dynasty of politics, as well as the other three hidden dynasties. This is in John chapter 19. Jesus Christ has been delivered up unto Pontius Pilate, and he's talking to Christ, but Christ will not speak with him. And Pilate says, it says here in John 19:10, it says, "Then saith Pilate unto him, Speakest thou not unto me? Knowest thou not that I have power to crucify thee, and have power, and have power to release thee?" And then verse 11, Jesus answered, "Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore, he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin." So what I want you guys to take away from this, and all you that are listening, is that none of these people that are in power could have the power unless it was given them by God. This is the negative part of God's plan. And living in these end times, we are inundated with the negative part of God's plan when we turn on the news, when we read anything on the internet, when we look at what our children are being taught in schools. That's what you're seeing. Everyone talks about, oh, this country's going to hell in a handbasket. Well, I guess it kind of is in a way. The negative part of God's plan is really showing through. The Kenites have picked up a great deal of power, and their plan is continuing along just as it should. I think of one example is that, take for instance, if you were to jump off of a building, a tall building, say a 20 or 30-story building, aside from reaching terminal velocity, which is the point at which acceleration no longer occurs and you have reached your maximum speed potential, aside from that, you are moving the fastest the closer when you hit the ground. In other words, when you hit the ground, you're moving faster than you were when 3 seconds after you jumped off the roof, which basically means the closer you get to the end, the faster things go, the more things speed up. So as you look around today, you're seeing this hidden dynasty of politics really do a lot of work. By leaps and bounds from year to year, you're seeing greater and greater things happen. You're seeing more rights taken away from us. You're seeing more liberties taken by the federal government. You're seeing an increase in spending. You're seeing an increase in the size of government. You're also seeing a decrease in the ability for each state to stand up for itself and its citizens. You're seeing all of these things, but at first it was slow, but now it's speeding up. And that's another way we can tell that the end is growing nearer and nearer by the day. And this isn't just on a state level or a national level or even a continental level. This is a world level event that is going to culminate in this one world system rising up out of the sea of people, as written of in the book of Revelations. And you're going to see this deadly wound occur. And then you're going to see, mark my words. Don't mark my words. Get your Bible out and mark those words. Read that, and you will see that this beast will have a deadly wound. And after that, Satan will come down here as the Antichrist. The Antichrist. Before Christ is what anti means. Instead of Christ, or in the stead of Christ. You're going to see these things. And chances are, you will see these things in your lifetime. We are living in the generation of the fig tree, that final generation that Jesus Christ spoke of in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, in which the fig tree generation began when that fig tree was planted. Both the good and the bad fig spoken of in the book of Jeremiah was planted, and May 14th, 1948. So do not fear. Know that this is part of God's plans. This may not be what you want to hear, but I hope that it is. And I think that you can find a great deal of solace both in our Father's Word and also being able to attribute what's written in our Father's Word to what you see going on in your world. Sam, would you have anything to add, sir?
Well, as far as the deadly wound goes, let's read a little bit of Revelation here. And verse 4 of chapter 6 reads, "And there went out another horse that was red, and power was given to him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth." And if you go into the Greek, this says to take the peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. And there was given unto him a great sword. And that's how the deadly wound happens. It's by a sword. It says that in the 13th chapter. And it also says when Satan appears as the false Christ, he has two horns like a lamb. And this is a theocracy. It's an imitation of the government of Christ. And a theocracy is where you have religious and governmental. So, and you can see a type of this in the book of Zechariah with Joshua, the high priest, and Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah, which was an ancestor of Christ, direct ancestor. And so there you have it. There you'll have those four hidden dynasties, all three of them in the one horn, the governmental, the educational, economic, political, and then in the other horn, the religious. So that's the main thing to be concerned about, not worried about. It's a privilege to be living in these end times.
Well, I'm just going to add to this to sum this up and kind of end this up. You see in the Bible written a number of times as a woman that travaileth with child. In other words, the birth pangs are getting closer and closer. And, I know human history has been long, and people will say to this very day that, there's no such thing as God. And of course, these things were written in the Bible that people would say this in the end times. But one of these days, that birth is going to come, the birth of a new age. We're going to see the millennium. And then after 1,000 years, we're going to see Satan released for a short season. And then we're going to see the final judgment. And it's all going to be over with. But that was just kind of adding to what you were saying there, Ryan, because these things are speeding up. Time is going faster. And it's not necessarily that time is going faster itself. Time is a constant. But the way things are happening in this world, things are speeding up. The Kenites are taking more ground, and they're being more blatant, and they're more in your face about it than they've ever been. And the reason for that is they know that their goal is almost achieved. So, yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Bruce. Well, Bruce and Sam and all of you listening, this looks like the end of our show tonight. Be sure and tune in. We'll be uploading the next show next week. This will be the final show in this 4-part series on the hidden dynasties, the 4 hidden dynasties of the end times. Next week, we're going to be covering the hidden dynasty of religion. Make sure you tune in for that. And thank you for joining us. This is a pleasure, and we are so glad that we're able to come to you here on YouTube. So, Bruce, thank you, sir.
You're most welcome.
And Sam, also, sir, it's always a pleasure to both speak with you and do any sort of project alongside you.
Same, likewise. Thank you.
All right. Well, God bless both of you guys. And for all of you listening, God bless you. And have a great night.
The Book of Jonah audio Bible study on Mark 13 records. Jonah means dove in the Hebrew. And as Christ said to the Kenite scribes and Pharisees in the book of Matthew, an evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonah. And as it's written in the book of Jonah, Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Write Mark 13 records at mail.com to find out how to get your copy of the Book of Jonah on Mark 13 records. Fantastic. I know you'll enjoy it.